where does AI play into this? How do I apply AI? For me, that's a better approach than going around from the opposite side trying to plug AI into every hole, because in some places where the risk is with AI is it's heavily dependent on the data, where and a lot of companies don't have their data sorted. A lot of them don't have a clear data strategy. They don't have the foundation, a good data foundation. It's almost to a point where it's giving a kind of like a, I said this to somebody else the other day, saying it's almost like giving a monkey a machine gun. You can do a lot of damage very quickly.
Welcome everyone. You're listening to the L.O.F.T Podcast, where leadership meets operations, finance, and transformation. I'm your host, Ranil De Silva. Lead with clarity, operate with purpose, transform with insight. Let's jump into the episode. In today's episode, Operations Mastery in a Tech-Driven World, we explore how leaders build reliable, adaptive systems and supply chains that thrive on both innovation and discipline. I'm joined by Kasun Siriwardene. He is the founder and managing director of Solutions Architects, an Australian technology consulting firm renowned for delivering independent enterprise and solution architecture services that align technology with strategic business outcomes. With over 2 decades of experience in IT and digital transformation, Kasan has built a reputation as a trusted advisor to CIOs and technology leaders, helping organizations design resilient, scalable systems and make architecture decisions that drive long-term value rather than short-term fixes. In this conversation, we unpack what it really takes to master operations in a tech-driven environment, designing high-performing workflows, integrating AI with intent, and building systems that remain dependable under pressure. From operational discipline to intelligence automation, Kasan brings in a practical, execution-focused lens on how organizations can future-proof their operations and scale with confidence. If you're looking to unlock smarter, more adaptive ways of working, this episode is for you. Kasan, welcome to the L.O.F.T.
Thanks, Ranil. Thanks for having me.
So I've known you for many, many years. I would say over 35 years.
That's true.
Is that right?
That's correct. It goes back to school days in Wesley College to riding the bikes down the street. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a great journey, especially seeing your career, progress from, initial graduate state in technology space and building your own business. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Okay, so it's been, my background starts from I started as a programmer. So I started as a developer who's writing software. That was the start, and I've sort of done that in some areas where in especially in supply chain as well. So I was working for one of the large logistics companies. We had and this is going back 20 years ago. I was trying to think what the dates were. It's that we had a large piece of work where we did work for defense. So we looked at how to write software, how to write reliable software, what makes these are mission critical systems, and how do you write these things. So that was the start, and my background was writing the software, understanding, supporting it, and part of the operations was to sort of also understand, because we were part of the support team, that if something goes wrong and you get calls in the night, if you don't write any reliable systems, it actually bites you back when you had to get up at 3 a.m. and problem shoot something. So this was a start. So from there, you go into a more system design kind of thinking, giving leadership to dev teams, progressing in a kind of an architectural. So from there, my path was being more like an architect. So how do you sort of design your systems for, depending, whether it's a high critical, finance system down to, operational systems, to a whole range of things. And from there, that sort of evolved into becoming an architect, an enterprise architect, and doing a lot of the architecture elements that I'm doing today. And and I think some of this was in my head. I wanted to sort of always start my own thing. I think this is coming back from my parents. My mom had her own business, so I think there was that DNA built into me to start my own thing. So that led to starting Solution Architects and my architecture consulting company.
That's awesome. So I think, knowing your parents pretty well as well, I guess, you guys always had an entrepreneurial mindset. So I think you were kind of building up on that. But if someone really wants to understand your leadership journey, what story would you start with?
I think it's my I think it's how I sort of analyze some of the businesses. I'll tell you how this started. Like there was a joke in my family where when we get the toys. I remember when my dad went to Japan, brought up this fancy toy for my sister. One of the things I do initially is like I dismantle everything. And the joke in the family was my mom or dad will come and give me a plastic bag and say, when you put this back together, all the leftover bits and the nuts you put in here. So I have this view of getting a high level view of the world, that dissecting what something looks like, and then understanding how that works, and then pushing forward from that knowledge. So I think that approach, I think, is kind of sort of traveled with me as I went into these leadership roles. And how do I look at how do I support teams and drive teams? And sometimes you got to sort of you know in some cases you got to let the team do their learning. So how do you push them along? How do you guide them? Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes you got to give them enough allowance to make the mistakes and come back. So that's the sort of path that sort of took me there. And the other part is there's a lot of learning. There's always mistakes happen. You learn, and then you sort of take a step ahead and end up from there. Yeah. So that was the kind of the background to some of the ways I'm sort of approach things, and then from there you started going to more leading smaller teams, leading initiatives, leading larger projects, and eventually sort of go into a role where you're sort of leading your own consulting company, and then there's always a lot of learning. There's a lot of things that you sort of uncover and step into and adapt. And one of the things is, and I'll tell this to a lot of people as well. Like I find a lot of leaders who start to panic, and regardless what happens, you got to stay cool, stay calm. There's always problems go along, but you just sort of guide yourself, guide the team, and also you need to look like you're in control. And that's something I've sort of always maintained with my team. If you're running the company, if there's a problem, and if you look like the world's falling apart, it doesn't give you anybody confidence. So you still have to be that the guidance and the rock behind the team to sort of support them.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think resilience, comes to mind when you talk about leadership and staying strong. Obviously running your own business comes with a lot of different challenges, whether it's cash flow, whether it's getting new clients, whether it's delivering top quality results. How do you kind of navigate through that as a managing director of solutions architects?
One thing we do, and my team is quite good at doing this, is like there's always things can go wrong. So whenever something goes wrong, one of the things we always do, and my team's good in this, is that we have a no blame approach to understand what went wrong. Because whenever something happens, because it's always a continuous improvement process. Because I remember one of the challenges. This is early on, and early on when we first get started, we made a mistake, and that mistake alone cost us 10K. There's no question. And then at that point, I was looking at that, and I know the team member who was involved, and he was kind of panicking. I was like, okay, I made this mistake. It's going to cost us now. What do we do? And I sort of took two approach. One is like, okay, it's happened. It's no point burning the person that happened here. All right. So this is learning. So one thing we did was, how do we make sure that this never happens again? All right. What are the steps that got us here? What are the steps that we missed here to get here? Were there checks and balances, or there observations we missed? Is it a communication problem? We did all this, and we had this no blame approach to look at. All right, let's stop this from happening again. So that's one of the things. So it's having this continuous improvement process built into our almost our day-to-day operations is what kind of then you learn off the back of that, and you make sure it never happens again. So that's the kind of approach you take. That because if somebody says that you're never going to make a mistake while you do what you do, that they haven't run a business. You get all sorts of clients. You get all sorts of characters you got to deal with. All sorts of problems with their business. The business changes we went through we went through COVID, we went through a whole range of things. You never prepared for every scenario that comes in. What you got to do is you got to prepare to adapt, and having a process and a set of operations behind that to adapt is the key thing that we found.
Yeah, that's very interesting, right? I mean, if a lot of the cultures are built on, no blame, really taking ownership and finding solutions together, I think a lot of the organizations, tend to thrive in very difficult circumstances. So it's really nice to hear that a person who actually, runs your own organization, giving that opportunity to your team members and employees to kind of, learn from their mistakes and really help drive results. And I think it's a really impressive thing to think about.
Yeah. No, it's good because one thing you don't want to do is because again, with the stuff we do, because we do a lot of design, there's a lot of thinking going in there, and there's a lot of innovation going in there. Now, if you start to penalize your team members for thinking outside the box and being innovative, because being innovative comes with a risk, right? You try new things, you try something. There's always a potential something may not come off properly. There's a failure. Now, if the team becomes penalized every time they make mistakes, what will happen is they stop becoming innovative. They're always going to play the safest path. So if you take the
Yep.
safest path, that means you're never going to be innovative. You're never going to try things that potentially give that clear benefits to the client. Because a lot of the challenges we get is because one thing I do a lot is we work with a lot of the leaders with multiple businesses, and you got to take their business strategy and then see how that turns into a what are the business strategy turns into, what's their technology strategy, how do we turn this into operations, how do we give them the benefits out of that. Now, to do that properly, you got to be innovative. You got to think through, okay, what are the, how do we approach this? Now, I'll tell you one of the ways we sort of approach something is like whenever you look at a business, we always look at what from a high level perspective what that business looks like on paper. I mean, we call that as a looking at as a capability model. So if you look at if it's a let's say it's a bank, it's an NGO, there's a whole range of capabilities that build makes that business operate. Now, you got to start to dissect that business and look at what are the components in there. And then one of the key things, I mean, I'll probably said this to you, I've probably said this to a lot of our clients, is like when I look at those capabilities, I usually put a lens on what are the commodity stuff, what are the differentiator stuff. And usually the differentiator stuff is what makes that business slightly different because if you're in a competitive business, those differentiators is where you want to invest. You want to make a difference there because you want to be competitively ahead of the others, or you want to do something different. Now that's where that what I said was that the whole innovative pieces come in when you look at those differentiated components. Now we want the team to be think outside the box, think outside. How do we give that edge to the customer on their systems? And when we look at the architecture, one thing we do is it's all about people, process, and technology. It's never about the technology because you got to look at the whole thing. You look at how the whole system works. And when I say system, that includes the people, it includes the support processes, includes the feedback loops to improve everything, right? And we want to approach that in you want the team to sort of be at the best, be innovative, and try to drive the best outcome from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to hear from a technology guy that people, process, and systems, the systems comes in the third place. I think that's nice to hear from, someone who's actually in the tech space, right? Because when I work with a lot of technology providers, I think usually, I hear this a lot where people process, but systems plays a big part of it. And usually conversations turned around on the head, talk with the systems first and then come into people and process. So it's nice to hear that. So from your perspective, in your journey, what is one system or a tool that radically improved your team's performance? Is there anything that comes into your mind as a solutions architect?
That's a bit of a tough question because we get approached by multiple companies with this. Now, somebody else like, what do you think about product X? Is this good? And I have my default answer to this because what I found is the, the some products are perfect for some companies, but they're completely wrong for some companies. So and this is why sometimes like how you mentioned that some people, a lot of the tech people lead with the technology first or lead with the product. There are people who get comfortable with, say, for example, here's an ERP I worked with. This is perfect, right? Or they know that product well, so they want to apply that to all the other use cases. But again, it doesn't work that way because you got to sort of understand. That's why I like when we approach things. For me, the last conversation is technology, and I always tell this to my team as well. I say, even with all the architecture people, what I say is like 20% of your job, and the easiest part of your job is the tech part. And it's the people and process. The other parts are the challenging part. That's where I need to think that once you got those bits sorted, the technology part becomes easy. So you're just understanding, so for in some areas, I found that some products so some companies work really well. It depends on the culture of the company, their process, their leadership, how they operate, what their culture looks like. For that scenario, a certain product or certain system works well. Whereas if you take the exact same system and if I put it in a different place, it doesn't work, right? So you almost have to understand what their backgrounds are, what their capabilities are, what's the leadership, what's the culture, where they're coming from. Do they have a clear strategy, what they're trying to approach? So I found that it's not easy to answer that question because I can tell you product X is perfect, but I'm sure that yeah, I can find you 5 scenarios where that doesn't work.
So that's interesting. So I totally understand, every organization, every company, every, complex situation and the context that you're trying to find solutions for is different. In your organization, is there anything that you use to kind of improve the performance of the team?
Uh, That's funny because when we look at a whole range of solutions, but we still keep a lot of things fairly basic within our team. What I found is that we use our standard communication tools. We do document management. Lately we've been using a lot of the AI capability to support us. Again, that's becoming part of the toolkit going forward. So we use some of the AI capability to do some of the research. But again, it becomes a combination of what I found is our processes are fairly solid, fairly good. So for example, when we deliver architecture capability to a client, we have our standard methodology that we apply. So there's a standard sequence he applies, the standard tools in there, and a lot of them around communication, a lot of them are proper document management. And I'll tell you one other thing. One thing that my view on this changed a little bit after having kids, but I'll tell you one thing I didn't like was I always didn't like surprises. Like if you do design, if you do consulting piece or any piece of work we're doing, always say I don't like surprises. I rather plan for a scenario going wrong or plan for certain option or certain thing, and then we have a plan. So if something goes wrong, okay, we knew this was going to happen, or we knew this was going to be a problem. Here's our plan. So that's all good until you sort of start to learn when you have kids, where then you kind of lose out of control because then I sort of went into a mindset where I need to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? So and that was a kind of a changing approach, and I usually apply a lot of these learnings that I get from all scenarios into our work as well, because again, every scenario that pops up, whether it's kids or whether it's a client engagement or whether you have a difficult conversation with a client, it's all learnings, and we sort of apply a lot of these things. And what I found is communication, transparency within the team was the biggest tool that, you get a lot of tech tools that support that process, but that was the kind of the vehicle that propelled us forward and make things operate better. And that's why if I look at the last, how I said we had a lot of mistakes, some mistakes we learned early up front, and over time goes by, with those becomes less and less because we have good communication, we have good transparency built in. And one thing I like is you got to get the team to ask a lot of questions, because let's say if I put a solution or an architecture for your strategy, one thing we do within the team is we want everybody to challenge it, because what I found is if the team can challenge it and find holes, well, the client will find holes, and then we don't want to find problems and holes in operations or in the real world. Let's have the thinking up front. Let's challenge it. So there are things like this that we sort of apply internally behind the scenes to make our processes better and our outcomes better. So I know you're asking like what are the tools and stuff you do, but I think it's more around the process behind the tool that made a difference rather than because we use a lot of the AI tools, we use a lot of the things that's out there, eh, but I found that using, because in the end we want to sort of embed the tools into our day-to-day operations. That's how we get a better outcome. I hope that
Yeah.
answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I think it's interesting. I think you got a different perspective on this. It's I think you might be the first technology person that I'm really pushing hard to give me some good tech solutions, but you keep coming back to people and process. So it's nice to hear that. Um, so AI is a big buzzword at the moment. There's a lot of things happening around AI, and there's a lot of risk around AI as well. So, what is the biggest opportunity do you see with AI? Looking at, there's a lot of new technology coming in. Agentic AI is a big hot topic at the moment. What are your thoughts on AI?
Yeah, it's big. I mean, this is it's hard to almost have a conversation without AI these days. If I go talk to a client, so it's a big part, and every CEO, every CIO has almost need an AI strategy part of their technology strategy. So it's a given. So and it's again there's a big opportunity with this because one of the things that's come up with that is and how we approach data, how we sort of plug this into our day-to-day operations. It's not only one part; it actually applies across the whole thing. Now, the challenge with a lot of the things, especially when it's a new buzzword and it's on everyone's agenda, is at the moment what I found is a lot of companies. It's almost like a lot of people are walking around with a hammer looking for a nail. That's my analogy for this because everyone's looking at how do I how do I apply AI to every scenario rather than approaching like, here's a scenario, here's a clear opportunity we want to improve. So here's my use case. Here's what good looks like. Here's the success metrics that we want to look at. How do I improve this? And where does AI play into this? How do I apply AI? For me, that's a better approach than going around from the opposite side trying to plug AI into every hole because in some places where I mean the risk is with AI is it's heavily dependent on the data where and a lot of companies don't have their data sorted at them. A lot of them don't have a clear data strategy. They don't have the foundation, a good data foundation, a good process foundation to apply the AI on top. Because again, if you apply AI on a bad foundation, it can accelerate and create a lot of risk very quickly. I mean, it's almost to a point where I mean, it's giving a kind of like a I said this to somebody else the other day, saying it's almost like giving a monkey a machine gun. You can do a lot of damage very quickly if you don't have the foundations right. So you got to look at when you apply this, you got to look at the end-to-end processes properly, and then see where this fits in, and see whether you have all the foundational components in there to sort of get the best out of AI. Because
Yeah,
the other thing,
interesting.
yeah. So what I was saying, the other thing I'll add to that is because the way the AI capabilities work is very different to how the previous systems used to work. Now, the olden day systems, everyone's designing systems with a lot of AIs and a lot of APIs to do a lot of the work. Now, in your traditional world, or if you take a scenario, you give it five, six, seven inputs, you have a predictable outcome. So the inputs and the outputs are, you can predict that. Whereas if you look at some of the AI-based APIs that's coming out of you can give the same five inputs depending on the scenario, depending on what data has been done, you get very different outputs. So it's sometimes harder to debug a scenario. You almost sometimes in some scenarios, I know with some places where they use that, they can't they don't know how this result came about, so and they can't explain it, and it's hard to debug when something goes wrong. You got to backtrack that. It's harder to identify what went wrong. So having that clear data strategy and this foundation helps, and picking the right use cases helps to sort of get a clear business outcome.
That's good advice. And how do you decide, when or what to automate versus keep it with the traditional human approach of working? How do you decide as a technology person? What advice would you give if you look at a client? Can you talk us a little bit through that?
Okay, so I'll still go back to the approach how we take. So let's say you take a particular a business. We want to get and this is where it comes in when we look at the broader strategy and how how I said at the start, we look at what are the capabilities that make up a company. So if I look at a particular scenario, whether it's a supply chain or an ERP eh, or all sorts of different scenarios. What we want to look at is we want to get a bird's eye view of all the moving parts. I mean, the way I say that is now, if I got an analogy for this. Now, let's say you're a general in a battle. If you're on the top of the mountain, you need to see your tanks, your troops, your artillery. You want to see where all the components end to end, right? So if it's a supply chain, it's right from the start of from your where it starts, right to the end customer. You want to see the entire picture. You can see all the components. Now, if you take that high level bird's eye view of the world, you can see here's all the components that make up my business, my system, my process, the workflow, and everything. Now, if you look at it from that point, you start to see that certain scenarios are has high risk to your business. Certain things have high are more commodity. Some of them are differentiated. Some of those things are it doesn't really make a difference to the organization. Whereas some parts might be a highly risk component. Let's say you in a highly regulated business, there are certain scenarios, a high risk capability components in your entire end-to-end scenario. Now, this is where we put that lens and see these scenarios where it's potentially commodity. There are a lot of things that's mundane, routine. There's no potential value add. If you automate that, if you use a lot of the AI, the risk to the business might be is low. Whereas if you look at some of the other parts of in that bird's eye view of the world, you don't see there's a lot of your team spend a lot of their time doing really mundane routine stuff. It doesn't add value. So there's no clear point. So they're doing a lot of the work. There's no real differentiating there. So those things you can automate, because what you want to do is you want to use the human in the loop in here to do the value added stuff. There are some stuff that's not value added. So how do you dissect your business? How do you sort of say this part is better automated, this part can be AI, but this component, let's keep that in control of the human. So that's the lens we put that, and the end outcome for this will vary depending on the business, right? If you're a finance company versus if you're a company that does a manufacturing, if they do, if they're in a defense company, and the other lens we put in a lot of the times, when I go look at a company, we have this architecture patterns we apply. One of the big ones I kind of like is called decoupled by design. So that means depending on the scenario, you can change components. I'll give an example we had now. And this is one of the earlier AI projects we did for a health client, maybe early last year or the year before. Now, one thing they were doing is this is for a breast cancer diagnosis use case. So they were building these scenarios where they wanted to have AI doing some of the cancer diagnosis, but they want to have that as along the radiographer who's doing all the work as a second line. So we want to have that secondary line. So one of the challenges we had was, so they were looking at how do I bring this capability and how do I plug it into my existing ecosystem and how do I make it work? Now, one thing we said at the time was, if I look at the market at the moment, all the cancer diagnosis AI capabilities, it's moving very rapidly at the moment. So if I wait 6 months from now, there'll be better tools in the market. If I wait 12 months, there are better tools in the market. Now, if you got a component that changes very quickly, you don't want to build your system architecture so that it's heavily plugged in, that you pick today's best technology and plug it in. Okay, your system's working today, but in 6 months, they are behind the ball, right? In 12 months, they are behind the ball. So how do I then design a system how do they adapt when the market adapts? So in these scenarios, we want to be able to say, okay, when the market changes, if there's a better AI capability out there that can do better cancer diagnosis, we should be able to bring that in and plug it in with minimal disruption. I mean, it's not easy as plug and play, some people might say, but at least if it's designed in a way that you can replace it with minimal, it's not a 6 months, it's not a 6 month project or a 2 year transformation to change that. That's what happens with a lot of companies where they bake their systems in so bad that the only way out of this is now we have to do this 2 year transformation and spend another $10 million trying to get out of this. We don't want that. We want to design it so that you can adapt to the market. So things like that. So if the answers on looking at which components to automate, which components need a human to do, which one requires an AI to be, depends on the scenario, depends on what you're trying to do, depends on what their strategy, what their end outcome looks like. So that's why whenever we sort of approach a client, we sort of spend a lot of time understanding where they're trying to get to, right? What does good look like for you? What are your success criteria? How do you, like, if I look at who's your competitor out there, if you want to be better than your competitor, what does that look like, right? So how do you see, we talk to the CEOs and the CIOs, the COOs in the company, say, okay, you're the operations lead for this company. Okay, forget about all your constraints today at the moment with your systems and people and the process. Tell me, what does it look like on what good looks like for you? Tell me, tell me, describe for me where you're not waking up in the middle of the night because you sort of worried about how some system falling over, some process falling. Tell me, what does it look like? And then they start to describe to me what good looks like, how they see their business operates, how they see how their customers operate, what are the risks there, how they mitigate. So they start to paint the picture. Once you start to paint the picture, then we start to decompose that, understand how does that look like, how does the tech strategy behind that support that, and then we work backwards. So that's the approach we typically take. And like I said, the answers for different companies will be very different, but that's because the end game for a lot of them is very different. So because otherwise I could say, here's the architecture for you to do this, and how do you invalidate? If I tell you, Ranil, like, for you to run your business, here's the architecture, and then say, how do you validate with I'm telling you what I'm providing you is correct or wrong? You can't, because I need the logic behind to get there. So understanding that part becomes part of that core reasoning, core challenge we sort of tackle, and out of that falls the answer to which parts, and how we want to tackle it. And in some scenarios where it might be better off to have a human in the control in that part rather than AI component, because that's the value added piece, or that's the high risk component. Whereas some components we can say it's done by AI, or in some scenarios we might say let's outsource that component. You find and we do this with a lot of companies where, because when we put that whole what's your differentiator capability, we actually helped a property developer a couple of years ago, where we looked at all their business and say, some of these capabilities, some of the teams you're running inside, why are you doing this? Because there are teams that are outsource providers out there that do this on a day-to-day basis as part of their bread and butter, right? You have no clear advantage by maintaining a team internal to do this part. So let's get that team done by an outsourced party. Whereas some components, we found that some of their value-added bits, they're actually handing over to some of the other outsourced parties. Let's bring that in. That's a differentiator for you. Let's bring those bits in. So the answer is to looking at which part to bring in, which parts to automate, which parts to, that all depends on what your business looks like, what your strategy looks like. So I don't know, I gave you a long answer to that, but that's our typical approach.
Great. I think we'll take a short break at the Loft, but when we come back, I think we want to talk a little bit about, as a entrepreneurial tech business owner, what are the challenges that you're facing? But also, you talked a little bit about outsourcing. I want to pick your brain on that as well. So let's take a short break at the Loft. We are taking a short break at the Loft. In the meantime, if you like any of our episodes, please subscribe, like, or follow us at the L.O.F.T.Club or any channels that you get your podcast from.
This episode is brought to us by Solution Architects. Solutions Architects partners with business leaders across multiple sectors to translate strategic goals and vision into practical technology solutions and roadmaps. Drawing on extensive technology architecture experience in business transformations, ERP, supply chain optimizations, AI, data, and automation, Solutions Architects delivers measurable technology outcomes through industry best practices. Let's connect at solutionarchitects.com.au.
Right. Welcome back to the Loft. We're still speaking to Kasan, and looking forward to understanding as a tech entrepreneur, what challenges have you faced setting up your business and running it, especially during COVID times, and how did you navigate through that?
Yeah, that was. It feels like an eternity ago now. With it's only been 5 years, but it feels like a long time ago.
I know it
Yeah.
feels ages, but when we were in that, I felt like it was a very long time, but it was only a couple of
Yes.
years.
That's right. That's right. It feels like 10 years while we sort of went through it. And again, yeah, it was hard because this was a good 4 or 5 years into the business, so we were sort of starting to get a bit of traction. We had a number of clients doing stuff, and we were doing a lot of the strategic work at the time. And the challenge was when COVID hit, all the strategic pieces went on hold because nobody's doing a big strategic pieces, nobody's doing all that. It almost went to what are the key bits you need to keep the lights on. So there was a very operational focus, keep the lights on. We don't know when we're going to come out kind of mindset that came about with every business out there. So we put a lot of our operations on hold, and yeah, I'm just trying to think. We sort of battled through. We had a number of clients. We sort of helped them through transition into an operational focus thing. How do we keep the lights on? Because the shift went from everyone's trying to work from home. There was a challenge across how do we get all these large teams now working remotely. That was everyone's challenge at the time. So some places didn't have the infrastructure behind that. They didn't have the tech solutions behind that to do all these things. So we sort of focused our areas on that. And then we sort of also switched into doing a bit more government work at the time, because at the time the only people who were spending money were government as well, because they were trying to do a whole range of things to get the things moving in that scenario. So we sort of did a fair bit of government work at the time rather than private work. So we sort of, again, the challenge was when the market shifted, we had to change and shift. So that was yeah, that was a challenge. So it's always a little bit harder.
So, Kasan, you talked a little bit about outsourcing. When you kind of go into looking at an organization or a business, you were very particular about, what we should be doing and what we should be outsourcing. Tell us a little bit more about that. If you're an organization that wants to really think about outsourcing some activities, whether it's actually in the technology space or whether it's on the operations space, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so for this one, again, the starting point for this is having a clear business strategy. Now, if I look at certain businesses, the question I ask for them is like, what's the core business here? What do you do? Like, because in a lot of places, if I look at some of the capabilities there behind the scenes, what they do is there are companies I know that they're in various industries, and they're building, in some cases, they're building these large IT capabilities within the business. They have the big development teams building applications, and then the question to me is like, is application building a core part of your business? I mean, for some companies, it makes sense, but for some of them, it's not part of their core business capability. Now, if it's not part of your core business capability, why are you building that capability internally? So it's about getting that right balance and understanding. Having that capability internally, does that give you an advantage over your other customers or not? So it's really the starting point for that is to look at what as a business over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, in those horizons. Where do you see yourself? Where does the business? How does the business operate? What are the core capabilities you need to do better? Because again, if I take any component or any capability, there's always a risk, there's a price point, there's a capability point that you look at. So you want to put those lenses in to sort of understand whether is it worth having that capability. I'll give an example. Like if somebody's starting a business, for example, like they're not gonna go and build their accounting package. No, you go. There's MyUp, there's Zero, there's all sorts of capabilities out there for the right price point, for the right capability. If it's a very large business, there are core ERP systems that give you a lot of the capability. If it's a smaller one, you can buy Zero, you can buy the capability. Nobody starts that. So you want to look at what are the core bits you need for your business to operate, and then build your capability. Whether it's a system, whether it's a team, the thinking is still the same. Because for me, when I look at a system, it's how I look at people, process, technology, that the whole combination comes together. So sometimes it's still a system run by people. It's a manual system. It's a team of 10 doing a lot of these things. but that's part of your system. It's a core building block of your business. Now, if that core building block makes sense for you to run it internally, then that's the approach you want to take. But if it makes sense that, because if what people sort of miss sometimes, if I look at a capability, now, when we look at certain things, we put a thing called the total cost of ownership, right? Because it's not just the output sometimes. Like if it's a dev team, the dev team they need training, right? If you build a product or software, when you need to update, there's patches, software goes out of, sometimes companies get bought out. Certain technologies are not the flavor of the month, all right? Because I know companies, they build certain products in these really obscure technologies. They have a really good product there, and the other company goes bust. And now they're, oh, hang on. So, how do we now do that? Because we have a technology that's no longer supported. So now they had to rebuild this technology in a new language or a new component. Now, you got to deal with all these things, and then if you build a new product, there's there's a maturity curve with any product. You build any product, it's gonna have bugs at the start, and then it stabilizes. It has, so these are all the cost of having all this capability. It's the same with everything else. So if you can ride that wave, and if it makes sense with all that to maintain that internally, you can do that. Otherwise, if somebody else outside has built a product and they've matured it and it makes sense, for example, the accounting package, as an example, you bought that as an outside capability, and then leverage that in. So that's the lens I put in, whether it's a system, whether it's a team, or whether it's a business function. You can look at it in the same way on what's the right combination to give you the outcome you're looking for.
Yeah, great. So do you think, you can use technology and systems to actually strengthen the culture and the trust in a team, not just, improving efficiency?
Yes, you can, because again, one of the challenges now, and I've seen this across, because when we go and because we do current state assessments for a lot of companies, we go and have a look at how the systems work, how the people work, what is it now. In a lot of places, what we find is the systems kind of come and go, right? So, the systems will change, but the data's there to stay. So when people use certain systems, and this is a common theme I find with some places where their systems don't work properly, is the users of the system start to distrust the system. They said, okay, I'll look at the system, I'll look at this, but the system says this, but I know this could be wrong. So then they go talk to two other people and then validate that. So it becomes like they have the tech, but they don't trust the tech. So they need to sort of then go and validate two or three other data points or talk to people to figure out, okay, now this makes sense. Now, and depending on the scenario, when let's say you have a system falls over, they have some kind of emergency situation in there. The company culture, how they respond to a scenario is different. If they can't trust the system, they're all running around like headless chicks sometimes because nobody knows what's going on. All right. So if you're gonna build systems, if you build this ecosystem for them to work, and if you build the trust behind that, then people start to build the trust, and they can understand the system, they trust the data, they're in a better place to operate better.
Great. So what advice would you give to leaders who are kind of overwhelmed with so many tech tools these days, but who's eager to kind of streamline and improve the operations in their organizations?
Yeah, because there's a lot of tech tools that come up, because every day there's a new tool, there's a new AI component in there, and this is the challenge that we got sometimes, because we sort of we need to keep an eye on the market. We need to understand what are the new technologies coming in, and then because we have to keep on track of that. So the idea is, again, I will go back to this, and you probably say this again, because from a guy who's working in the tech space, for me the tech is the solution part of that, but you still need to understand what the problem is. The way I'll approach is, what problem are you trying to solve? It is the approach I'll ask the leader, right? Because I know some leaders that lead with a tech or lead with a product because they're comfortable with it, or whether it's been done in their previous business. They come and say, I want to implement system X. The key message for all the leaders, like you start with the why and what problem are you trying to solve, and then from there, then you look at what are the tech that supports behind that, and whether you bring the right tech is the answer. Because otherwise, it becomes when you talk, because the vendors are really good with this. If you talk to multiple vendors, and if you talk to, and because I talk to a lot of vendors, their tool solves every problem in the world. If you don't know what we are trying to solve, it will solve your problem. So the question is, if you're gonna meet up with the vendors, look at new tech, look at the approach. If you don't know what you're trying to solve, they'll tell you what you're trying to solve, and then you slowly, what you're doing is you're actually putting their solution in rather than you trying to address your own problems. So yeah, that's my message, is to sort of say, start with what are you trying to solve.
Keeping on the AI theme, how do you balance out between technology and the human aspects of it?
Uh, yes, I know there's a lot of talk with AI at the moment. So now there's this. You got the artificial intelligence part with AI and everything. With all the LLMs and all the open AIs and all that's developing at the moment. But we shouldn't disregard the human intelligence, the human part of this. And I'll give an example for this, because again, you know how AI has come a long way from your Deep Blue playing chess and all those days from 20 years ago. I'll tell a bit of story, because I don't share this too often, because it's I used to be part of the school's chess team. I was the school chess captain. So and we used to do some tournaments with multiple schools around the chess tournaments. And now one thing I found was there was this game that I was playing with in one of the tournaments, and I was clearly losing that game. There's no question. He was just barely hanging in there, and that girl was really good. Now, and at the time, I was sort of looking at this, going, I'm losing. There's no way I'm gonna win this game." So, and I was looking at it, is there any other way that I can win this game? So this is about looking outside the box, and look, what other ways can I win this? So one thing I noticed with the way she was playing the game is she was very in chess. I don't know if you don't know about chess. If you actually touch a piece, there's a thing called touch move. If you touch that piece, you have to move that. And they always, in the tournaments, you had to follow along. If you touch it, you got to move it. So in couple of scenarios, I found that whenever I touched a piece and I was trying to back off and not move it, she was saying, "Oh no, no, hang on, you touched it, you got to move it. That's part of the rules." So she was very insistent on that. And I did that twice to figure out how pushy she is gonna be with this. And then she was very pushy. Like, if you touch it, you move it. So it's very clear cut. And then I thought, okay, so I'm clearly lost here. There's no way I'm gonna win this game. So then I sort of play along that human side of the thing, because there was one thing with her. She was very on the rule side. So I started touching some of these pieces and trying to back off and not move those pieces, and then it kind of got a little bit agitated. And then I found that when we got to a point where I actually touched this piece, and then I was sort of didn't want to move it, and then finally I said, "Okay, I'll move it." As soon as I moved it, as soon as I put it on the board, she took that piece. She didn't even blink twice, and that opened up another move. And the next move after that, she got checkmate, and she was so distressed after that, because it's and this is looking at again, what I'm trying to say is, like, sometimes your AI intelligence is looking at the data and the scenarios put in front of it, because the AI is good at looking at, here's 50 scenarios. Based on those 50 scenarios, this is the best way to approach that. Whereas from a human perspective, you might actually find completely, off the, outside the box, completely different way to win a game, where AI won't see that. So you want to keep those kind of things uh, in the human side of things, because they might find some really obscure, clever, ways to win a game that nobody's thought through. Whereas your AI might not miss that, because it's not part of your rule set to win a chess game. So that game was won purely by playing into the human psychology side of that person, rather than playing chess there. But
Yeah.
but it's still a win, and it's something that we want to apply in the business and operations in the world. But so that's why, if you're applying AI, pick your scenarios. But the humans might find really obscure ways to sort of give you some benefits you didn't plan.
That's a great story, and I remember some of that story vaguely, actually, going back 30 plus years. Great. So it's been a pleasure talking to you at the L.O.F.T, Kasan. I'm pretty sure you're just, starting your day in Melbourne in Australia. So I'm going to let you go, but it's been a really insightful conversation. And thanks for joining us at the Loft.
Thanks, Ranil. Thanks for having me again.
Here are the 3 key takeaways from our discussion today. First takeaway, start with the problem, not the technology. The most critical approach is understanding what you're trying to solve before selecting any tech solution. Leaders should define clear business strategies, success metrics, and desired outcomes first. Technology is only 20% of the job. The real challenge lies in understanding people, processes, and organization culture. Without knowing the problem, vendors will define it for you, leading to misaligned solutions. Second takeaway, build a no-blame culture for continuous improvement. Creating psychological safety where teams can innovate without fear of punishment is essential. When mistakes happen, focus on understanding what went wrong and preventing reoccurrence rather than assigning blame. This approach encourages innovation and risk-taking, which are necessary for finding creative solutions. A culture that penalizes failure will only produce safe, uninnovative outcomes. Our third and final takeaway. AI requires solid foundations to deliver value. Before implementing AI, organizations need clear data strategies, good data foundations, and well-defined processes. Applying AI to poor foundations can accelerate damage quickly. The right approach is identifying specific use cases with clear success metrics, then defining where AI fits, rather than trying to force AI into every scenario. Focus on automating commodity tasks while keeping humans involved in high-value, differentiated work. Our call to action: use these key takeaways from our discussion in your leadership journey. Thanks for joining us on The Loft. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please go online, like us, follow us, and subscribe at theloft.club or any channels that you get your podcasts from. Until next time, lead with clarity, operate with purpose, and transform with insight. I'm your host, Ranil De Silva. Until we see you again. Bye for now.